Great. So that's just coming up to 3 minutes past, so I'm going to make a bit of a start. So, welcome everyone to the session. We're going to be thinking today about how to prepare for impact in the next Research Excellence Framework, or REF as it's called, REF 2029. And what a great time to be doing this training, because we have everything to play for at this point. So much that we can do. I will confess, when I was doing this training back in 2020, 2021, as people were all just kind of preparing their last REF submission, I got quite negative feedback because people were like, I can't believe I've come on this training course, but I needed to know this 5 years ago. and we are now in that situation where we've got that lead time. There are things we can do. For some of us, this is about coming up with the idea, getting the research funding, completing the research, and doing the impact, all potentially within this window. And as you will also find, we're going to be talking about some of the things that we need to do institutionally as well. There are things that we can put in place to start changing our culture around impact now, when those changes can really make a difference. And of course, that's why we're doing it, but it also means then that we get to write about what we did and prove that we are doing good practice engagement and impact in that new section that we have to write about for REF 2029. So I'll explain the format of today's session and then introduce myself a little bit more for those who don't know me, and then we'll dive right in. So the way that today's session works is we're going to start with an introductory segment where we're going to have a think about the latest REF guidance. I'll do a bit of reading between the lines, give you as much as we currently know, so that your head's in that space. We'll then back up to think about exactly what it is that we are trying to monitor and evaluate and use as evidence. So we've got a very clear definition of impact. I'll give you my time-saving tools, which many of you will have had in previous trainings if you've worked with me before. But I will explain how oops, someone's starting a meeting recorder, that's fine. I'll explain how we can use those tools to fix problems with significance or problems with reach in a case study that we are developing. So we'll have those tools and definitions sitting there ready for us. Great. And then we'll think about monitoring, things that we can all do quickly and easily to monitor things, capture things opportunistically as they happen that might be impact. We'll then think about much more purposefully evaluating our impact, and we'll have a real focus on the kinds of tools that we can use to do evaluations very quickly and easily, that are not going to require you to get a degree as a social scientist, for example. And so we'll equip you with all of that. And then finally, we'll think about evidence, how we use that monitoring evaluation data to create provable claims and narratives that will convince an audience that, yes, indeed, we did have an impact. And yes, it was us, at least to some extent. And in that, we'll be looking back at REF again. We'll look at a paper that I co-authored with Bella Reichard and others, to give you a bit of a formula for what makes 4-star in REF 2029 very specifically. So a very clear method for writing a 4-star impact case study. And we'll look at an example so that I can give you a bit more of that strategic thinking about how you apply the lessons from the paper that we'll be looking at in a real impact case study, again, to make this really easy. Even formulaic to an extent, so that you get what you need to do based on that evidence. So that's the structure. This as a training, I tend to do this mainly in plenary because lots of people have lots of questions that everyone wants the answers to. So we'll see how that goes. We may do some small group stuff, but I'm planning to do this mainly in plenary, and we'll do questions in the chat, and you can always raise a hand. With the size of the audience today, we won't get through all of your questions, so do bear with me, and I'll give you my contact details so you can follow up afterwards if there are questions you want to get answers to that I don't manage. And I'll just start my screens, my slideshow as I explain a little bit more about me, who I am. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Chief Executive of Fast Track Impact, which is a company I set up to generate impact from my research on impact. And I specialize in environmental governance research in part, and I do impact based on that. I had my own REF impact case study in 2014 and 2021. But I also study impact, and some of that is very specifically in relation to REF. In fact, with colleagues, we're currently analysing the 2021 data. And so what you will get today will be evidence-based, but it will also be real and realistic based on my experience, like you as a full-time academic, trying to juggle family life and everything else with a full-time job, and somehow managing to do impact alongside all of this. So we'll keep things as realistic and as efficient as possible throughout as well. So it'd be lovely to hear who you are. I'd love you to head over to the chat and tell me that now. Also in the chat, I'm just going to put some instructions on how you can ask anonymous questions at any point. So hopefully getting in there early before everything comes. There we are. And also in the chat is a copy of your free course handbook. So £30 if you want the hard copy, and you can get that from my website. But the PDF I sell for a £5, and you're getting that free today. So that's where some of the evidence is, but we'll point you to various peer-reviewed papers that I and my colleagues have written. And in fact, I'll maybe just give you all the links. No, you know what I'm not going to do? I'll do it as they come, because I'm going to get lost in all the hellos. So great to see you, all the hellos. Wonderful to meet you all. And as expected, given our focus on REF today, mostly UK colleagues, in fact, almost entirely so far. Great. Good. And yes, I am recording this. I will give you all the links that go in the chat will come in an email to you via Eventbrite, along with a link to the recording on YouTube. Wonderful. Great. Okay, so let's dive into this now. And as I said, I'm going to give you a bit on the latest guidance, what we've got there. And to introduce that, however, I want to give you a little bit of a critical take on this. We could go on for much longer than I'm going to, but just to point out that a Research England funded study suggested that more than half of us actually hold negative attitudes towards REF. And much of that negativity is targeted at impact. This is results from a Wellcome Trust survey of, I think, 4,000 researchers, a fairly large survey. I've done research published with Jen Chubb based on interviews with UK and Australian researchers who've said something similar, that, you know what, for a lot of funders now, there's no point in asking what you think is the most academically significant or interesting question if it's not impactful enough, it's not fundable enough, and you might as well not try. The idea that we are changing what we're doing, not because we want to, but because we're trying to play these games. And these are high-pressure games. If you look at the word cloud from that Wellcome Trust study, there are some positive words in there, but a lot of negatives, and the word metrics in there being, I think, at least one of the things that is driving this. And this is what ultimately drove me to write my last book, Impact Culture. The sense that the cultures around impact that I was visiting in the lead up to the last REF were shaped largely by the REF itself, as a secondary concern, perhaps by funder mandates. And if we do nothing, that is where we end up. And And many of these groups are massively demotivated. There's a sense that, that this is just part of this capitalist machine that is churning out numbers. We are just one of those numbers. It's all about the money, and we play this game hard enough, we get the money, and that's what it's all become about. And there's something about impact where we're actually trying to help people. There's something quite deeply disturbing about this for many of us. And so this book is a plea to do things differently. And I'm going to talk in a little bit more depth about some of the key lessons from this, because very helpfully, REF2029 has a focus on research culture. And implicitly, that includes impact culture. And I'm going to explain to you exactly how and why getting impact culture right will actually not just make your place of work a happier, better place to do impact and work more generally, but actually help you in REF as well, given that we do actually have to write about our impact culture now in the REF, in the impact component. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just give you 2 more slides to introduce what we are expected to do on impact now in REF. And we'll then break for some questions. So at any point, if you have questions, please do write them in the chat and I'll get to as many of them as I can. So first of all, there's, I think, 2 things which I feel are very progressive, very welcome. The first is that if you are in a very small unit, not many of you there, there was a barrier to entry previously, that there was a minimum of 2 case studies you had to submit. Now we can put in a fairly small submission with just 1 impact case study. And based on the current guidance, and the FAQ suggests that this might change because there is some negative feedback around this, but currently the idea is if you have only 1 impact case study, then your scores will be split 50-50 between that case study and this new engagement and impact statement, what was described as an impact narrative for those of us who were around in 2014, but that has engagement added into it. And the suggestion is that there's going to be some kind of sliding scale where the majority of us, where we've got a few impact case studies going in, those impact case studies will be worth 20%. And the engagement and impact statement will be worth 5%. So a total of 25% to impact across those 2 elements. An important clarification at this point is that there is only 1 of these engagement and impact statements per unit of assessment. Any number, depending on the number of staff you have of impact case studies, that remaining 20% is split between, but just the 1 of these narratives for the whole of your unit. And there's also quite a lot of confusion about where engagement goes. And I'm going to tell you very clearly, engagement goes in that engagement and impact narrative. That's where it belongs. The guidance, the assessment criteria for the impact case studies has not changed. And the format has not changed either. So it's essentially 3 things: significance, reach, and attribution. And so, yes, we may need to write about engagement in our impact case studies, but we only do so for 1 reason, and that 1 reason is its attributional function, where engagement is the glue you need to glue together your underpinning research and your impact, that explains how and why that impact ultimately came from that research. And if you don't need that glue, if you can get away with it, then my advice is to junk the engagement, cut it out. And the evidence suggests quite clearly that that is the case, and I'll explain a bit more about that towards the end, because these are words which are not attracting scores, and they may ultimately detract from your score. So we put engagement in only for 1 purpose, for an attributional purpose. Otherwise, this is not an engagement case study. That is not where you're writing about engagement. That only goes in the engagement and impact statement. The other thing that we've seen that removed is this 2-star threshold for underpinning research. This was recommended by Lord Stern after 2014, but ignored for an unknown reason. Research England didn't tell us why for REF 2021. And before you worry about this, they're making it clear that this is still a research impact assessment. So this will still have to be based on rigorous research. But the key thing that is being removed now is the need to demonstrate that that underpinning research is internationally leading in terms of its academic significance and its originality. And again, before you start worrying about that, actually, it really doesn't matter how academically significant or original your research is for impact. Because imagine you've got, I don't know, a model, a method, a theory, that you developed in one context, in one system, and you published that, and that was an academic breakthrough, and it was highly original. But then someone comes along, takes that, exactly the same method, tool, model, theory, whatever it is, and they apply it in a new context, a new system. There may be no particularly original or significant academic insights from that, but it works in that new system. And as a result, we have a whole new domain of impact. Entire populations who are benefiting in new ways from this really rigorous, fantastic tool, model, whatever it is that you've got. And so, yeah, no originality, not academically significant. We might publish it in a low-grade journal, but ultimately what matters is this is rigorous research, which in this new context has made a difference. And so, great. I think this is very progressive and long overdue. So that's points 1 and 2, and I've begun introducing point 3. In fact, I have introduced point 3. So the only point that remains is this idea around the rigor of engagement. This is a quote from the initial decisions document that Research England put out a number of months ago now. And there's been a lot of head scratching over this term, because what on earth does that mean? And the good news is that Research England have, pardon me, have clarified this now, and we got them onto a call, and a bunch of us were on that call. It was an hour long. It was recorded, and you can view that. I'm putting this into the chat for you now. Helpfully, I turned that into a blog so that you can quickly read all of the key conclusions from that. In my blog in the chat now. But if you want, you can see the blow-by-blow account of this with our colleague from Research England at the bottom of the blog. Essentially, though, what she explained is that when you read rigor of engagement, what they actually mean is best practice engagement. They referred specifically in that to the best practice engagement guidance from the National Coordinating Centre on Public Engagement, and I'm putting their guidance in the chat now. I looked at that and thought, yeah, great, love that, love what they do. But I also thought, yeah, you know what, there's a few things missing here. So first of all, their remit is not just engagement with research. It can be any kind of research, and even if it's research, it doesn't have to be your research. So in REF terms, there's something missing there in terms of guidance for researchers and engagement specifically with research. And also, this is about good practice in terms of engagement. And actually, there's a very blurry line between where this is good practice engagement, good practice impact. And when you think about good practice impact, you suddenly realize there's a whole load of other stuff that's missing as well. In the chat, I'm putting a link to my Rethinking Impact paper, which is effectively an equality, diversity, and inclusion approach to doing impact. And I drew on that, as well as my impact culture work, to try and think about this a little bit more deeply, a little bit more comprehensively than we've got in the guidance from NCCPE. And I turned that into a blog, and I'm going to give you this blog as well. And I think what's useful to know is that I have had feedback from from Research England on this blog. And they have told me, yeah, that is exactly the kind of thing that that we think that people should be looking for. And I'm in the process of discussing with them what some next steps might be to that, including getting a version of this guidance published out to REF panels, for example. And I think the key thing is that this is resonating with those who are working in this area, whether ultimately anything that is published actually bears resemblance to this, whether that does go to REF panels, who knows. I do know that our paper on what made a 4-star REF impact case study was widely read and used by REF panels, whether or not anything came officially from Research England. And for me, the key thing is that that we have an idea at this point in the process of what might be expected, because some of these things are things that you cannot retrofit a year or two from the deadline. So there's my guide. Loads more in the guide itself. So I'm just going to maybe highlight three or four of these on screen. This is a summary of the blog. And so, yeah, have a look at that paper on my EDI approach to impact. But one of the tools I'll be giving you is my 3I analysis approach to identifying who ultimately we should be engaging if we're going to make this inclusive. But we can go beyond that by using this tool to take a more empathic approach, which enables us to be way more sensitive. And I think a lot of the grimpacts, as Gemma Derrick has called them, negative outcomes from research in society come when we go in like a bull in a china shop, not really understanding that context. And so just backing up, taking that time, using a tool to systematically think about our context can make an enormous difference. I think, yeah, maybe the other thing that I'll just highlight, and in particular, if you're interested in this, I've got an event coming up. So let me just give you that as well. So this is a link to all of the free trainings and other things I've got coming up. And we've got one on the ethics of impact coming up. Because I think there are just so many unanswered questions here. So my colleague and I, Eric Jensen, we have a draft paper, which is currently with our funders, James Daybell and Louise Rutt from the University of Plymouth, for inputs as co-authors. That paper will be turning into an open authorship opportunity if you would like to co-author that paper with us. And that link will be going out later this week, only to people who are registered for that workshop. So if you want to find out more and have the opportunity to co-author that paper, then sign up for that workshop, and you'll hopefully see it fairly obviously via that link. And of course, sign up to anything else you like the look of there. And I guess just to highlight why this might be important. First of all, many of us are working in the fields where we do not need to put our research through ethics committee. If I'm a natural scientist, an engineer, a physicist, etc., I don't have to go through ethics committees for the work that I'm doing. And yet we can probably all think of highly controversial bits of research that have ultimately had real-world impact. I don't know, artificial intelligence, for example, genetic modification of foods and such like. And if you're not having to work with human subjects and the like, then great, I can put those great ideas out into the world and we just see what happens. Yeah, I once sat on a panel where we had an idea to spray genetically modified wild plants over a landscape. And I was like, yeah, guys, there is nothing in our review process that tells us we can't do this. None of the reviewers have commented on this. It's not there is not an ethics check as part of this process. This is not going to have to go through any ethics committee, but just hold on one moment here. And the reviewers loved this proposal. It was top ranked until we talked about this and thought, yeah, maybe there's a bit of a problem here. And so stuff like this can happen, and it does happen on a regular basis. And ultimately, for those of us in management positions, what could be happening on your watch? And when that comes back to your university and the media and the public ask, how on earth was this allowed? Do you have those checks and balances or not? And what do we do about that? And even for those of us who do have to go through ethics for our research, it is for the research only. Nobody is looking at how ethical or otherwise our engagement is. And a lot of us working with vulnerable groups where if we don't engage with good practice, we could actually, create real harm here. But yeah, that's out of scope for your ethics committee, typically. So yeah, quite what we do about this, I don't know. But if you would like to be part of that solution, writing a paper, and as ever, with impact, the goal is that James and Louise will then be turning this into a toolkit that will be available to the whole of the sector. So be part of that if you're interested. But just to give you a sense of the kind of stuff that I think we should be thinking about, that I know others agree with me we should be thinking about. And if you want to start thinking about it, now is the time, because later on, you can't just hurriedly retrofit that onto a bunch of applications that are already funded and happening. So loads more in the blog, but hopefully this is already firing off lots of ideas. And so, yeah, someone's asking which workshop is that? So sorry, that clearly wasn't clear enough then. I will give you the direct link to sign up to the workshop and have that open authorship opportunity. In fact, very excitingly, we got the news, the last open authorship project we did from one of these workshops as part of this community last year. It was accepted for publication this morning. So I'm just going to put this in. So this is a workshop we had on the word stakeholder. And alternatives to the word stakeholder. And so this is the manuscript we submitted, and with very minor edits, this is what will ultimately be published. So this, as a model, it's a really nice model, and I'd love to do this again with you on the ethics of impact. Great. Karen's asking if someone can switch on captions. I'm willing to do that. If someone can tell me how, unless someone else can. In fact, you know what, Karen, how about I just try and make you, yeah, you know what, that's not easy. If someone can help out, Karen, that would be great. Questions? I'm hoping there's more in the chat. No, I don't think so. Oh, Bella is here. I've already signposted Bella's work. Highly recommend that you connect more broadly with what she's doing. And she has a session coming up, which I was going to tell you about. Have we got this on the website yet, Bella?
Last time I looked on Friday or something, it wasn't yet, but I've emailed Maddie and hopefully it will be. So the date will be in October, so it's a while to go. But it will be on, also quite REF related, it will be on preparing impact case studies right now, which sounds a bit weird maybe because it's a couple of years until we submit. But in working with a couple of universities, we found that it actually helps to try and draft a narrative arc now, because that can also then help you see where maybe gaps are and where maybe more opportunities are. And the workshop is about that. So it'll be geared at people who have been asked or will by then have been asked to write a draft case study, and we'll be doing that in that workshop. And it will be on the website soon, hopefully.
Yes. Thank you. And I will be bringing my own impact case study. So this is not a technique that I've used, but I have heard lots of positive feedback from Bella's work on this. So I'm looking forward to actually coming and learning and doing this for myself as well. So yeah, let's make sure that a link to that workshop goes out in the email to you all as well, if you want to follow that up. Great. So thanks, Liz. Just submitted a journal article. Interesting. On the ethics of engagement. If you could share that with us so we can build on that, Liz, and cite you, if you're comfortable, then if it's published, okay, no worries, whenever you're comfortable. Yeah. Great. So your own ethics committee has taken this on board. Liz, I would love it if you can contribute to our new paper and our toolkit. That's really exciting. Nice. So any other questions? I normally have lots of questions at this point, so you're all being very polite and waiting for someone else to ask. And I know you have questions, so you can raise a hand or write in the chat, whichever you prefer. I didn't say about breaks, actually. We're going to aim to take probably a couple of short breaks around about on the hour, because it's quite a long session. So maybe, yeah, 10-minute breaks, something along those lines. It can take longer if people need. So hands up or questions in the chat. I'll just wait if you're typing.
Mark, there's one question in the chat actually on who can claim the impact by Irene.
Thank you. Great. I can see it now. Sorry, I missed that earlier. Yeah. Okay. So in REF terms, it is the original author who gets to claim this. But there is some wiggle room here. So the key thing is that you have to have underpinning research that has your institution as the affiliation. And so yeah, so that's your research it has to be based on. What's quite interesting is you can get indirect impacts from this. So you could be a theoretical mathematician with just a nice theory. Someone else turns that theory into an algorithm or an equation maybe first, and then an algorithm. That algorithm turns into a bit of software, and ultimately it generates impact. You had nothing to do with any of that. But ultimately, if you can demonstrate that that software that made millions of pounds couldn't have been done without your bit of theory, then that impact is yours. But equally, the team that turned that into an algorithm, if they can demonstrate that their algorithm was also essential to this, then they can claim the impact. And so this is how you can see actually all research is incremental. We build on the shoulders of giants. And so as long as you can demonstrate that you have made an original contribution that is integral to that impact, it may still build on other people's work. And it will almost certainly build on other people's work. But it's about that argument you make that, yeah, here is our original contribution. Here's why this contribution actually makes a difference and contributes to that impact. And so that's your wiggle room, effectively. So that's a more complicated answer than perhaps you wanted, Irene, or Irene, is it? Apologies if I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly. Do you want to follow up on that at all? Did that help?
Let me find a way to switch on my mic. Thank you so much. It is brilliant, actually. It is. I thought about this question when you said the example that somebody may develop a model in a certain context, and then somebody else can take this model and apply it in a different context, and this process it's becoming more flexible now because we don't have the restriction of the at least two-star research. Because people who apply a theory may not deliver a very rigor research, but they may have impact. So in this chain, there are different levels of contribution. So from what you are saying, it might be possible people claim the impact, even if they are higher in the chain or lower in the chain. Is that right?
Yeah, and actually, I meant to say something earlier. I'm glad you spoke there. There is a grey area, a blurry line that we're going to be getting clarification on, I believe, from Research England on exactly what is research. Because simply to take someone else's research and apply that in a new context without there being any new knowledge generated from that, that's consultancy work. And ultimately, there's a grey area here in terms of whether REF panels might see, well, actually, yeah, that wasn't your research, that wasn't your contribution that you made. However, there are lots of examples, and you can see these in the REF impact case study database, where people have effectively done that, and their original contribution is the research that is necessary to take that concept, model, method, whatever it is, and apply it, adapt it in this new context. And there is new knowledge that is generated in the process. That's not maybe 2-star level, but there is an original contribution as part of this. And so what I would expect in the guidance is that there will be something that will explain that this has to meet 2 criteria as underpinning research. It has to be research, so there's an originality component in here, there's new knowledge, and it has to be rigorous as well. The most likely place, if we need to, that we would write about that, I suspect, will be in that underpinning research narrative. However, if all of your outputs are in peer-reviewed journals, or if your arts and humanities, if they're in monographs by prestigious academic publishers, and you've got some high-grade research funding behind you, yeah, nobody is going to think for a moment that this is not rigorous research, and I wouldn't bother putting any text to that. But if all of your outputs are not peer-reviewed, if you think there's good reason that people might question that, then you may need some narrative around that to explain why your research meets those 2 criteria. This is rigorous research that is underpinning my impact that we can claim affiliated to our institution. So there are grey areas.
Mark,
Yeah.
it's Liz. Sorry to interrupt. It's too hard to ask this question in the chat room, so I don't have the energy at this time of the day, having worked all weekend. Look, it's a sort of tricky question, and it is this thing that you've raised in your response to the questioner. And it's around the intersection between research and consultancy work. So in my area, often the charitable organisations that I do work for can't and don't do what I would call research contracts. They just don't have the wherewithal. So what I will be doing is I will be bringing my own original methodologies, approaches, and research findings to those organisations who will be adapting what I have discovered, learned, grown, developed over many, many decades, and they will be applying it and tailoring it, often with my advice, in more complicated and diverse settings. So, for instance, one setting might be one involving mental health. The other area might be involving people experiencing extreme challenges, traumatic experiences. So it is consultancy, it is using research, but it's doing it through consultancy, and it is new knowledge.
Yep.
So, I mean, it is the REF broad enough to acknowledge these sorts of things? Because, I mean, at the moment, particularly in the UK, we have an becoming even more emasculated advice sector service across the country because of all the cuts and the austerity. But they want to do evidence-based modifications and changes to their ways of working, informed by good practice and informed by an evidence base. And they can't afford, and it's not they're not commissioning research because they can't do that. They don't have the infrastructure to it. So they will get either pro bono or consultant research alongside others that might do research through philanthropic trusts and stuff. So I'm interested in the fit. I mean, you get me, yeah.
Yeah, got it. So this, it does help unhelpfully introduce some quite murky grey areas. But I'm going to give you 2 ways in which this can work with consultancy work. So your consultancy work can either be underpinning research, or it can actually be the engagement or the pathway to impact. So in the first way that you were talking about this, you have done your own underpinning research, published most probably in prestigious outlets, and now you're advising someone and helping someone to translate that into their context. That consultancy project would be the engagement or the pathway that gets your underpinning research into practice on the ground and delivering impact. And so in that case, I would frame that as a pathway to impact and I might not even mention it in my impact case study as a result. Because what I care about is that those charity colleagues are able to say that, yeah, that thing that we're now doing ultimately came from Liz's original research, and she helped us get there. but the process of getting there is less relevant now in your impact case study. In other cases, and I've done this myself, I will take consultancy money to do research. And there are novel contributions, new knowledge that is coming out in those consultancy reports that I could, if I want, publish in a prestigious outlet, whether it's a journal or a monograph. And at what point this becomes publishable in academic terms will vary from discipline to discipline. But at the point at which your consultancy report has new publishable knowledge, at that point you can now use this as underpinning research and just have that narrative around it to explain, yes, this is rigorous new knowledge, i.e. this is research that is underpinning it, even although it was funded as a consultancy contract. Does that help, Liz? I will assume yes. Great. Good. I've got loads more questions.
No, I was just going to clarify that. Sorry, my mute button. So if you were to, because I do a bit of both, and I'm sure others do too, so I think it's pertinent. So if you were to do consultancy work and translate it, as you say, into peer-reviewed articles and so forth, which is something I make a practice of doing anyway, the issue that you then confront, as just a warning, I guess, to colleagues, is you would have to make sure that your consultancy work went through some sort of ethics approval process, because you cannot publish in peer-reviewed journals research involving human, human participants, unless it has been. So that's another warning, I guess, that you'd have to make sure that the consultancy work, if you're intending to translate it into research and peer-reviewed, actually goes through an ethics process. So
yeah, agreed. I'm going to make the same point when it comes to your evaluation work. You may choose to publish your evaluation, but oops, if you didn't put that through ethics, then all of a sudden you've got a problem there. So yeah, totally agree with you on that. Really important. The other thing, actually, for consultancy work is to check your contract to make sure that you are allowed to publish it. And some contracts have some stuff in there that says, yeah, this is, especially in the commercial sector, this is for us and for our eyes only, and no, you don't get to publish this.
And what I've been quite successful with them, because I live in a lot of commercial enterprise, this is just tips for everybody, so I hope you're not taking up time, but what I've done, we have a privacy notice. I go to those entities before I sign the contract, be it consultancy or research, and I argue with them, and these are organisations that are averse to allowing their confidential material to be published. But if you do it in a particular way, they will actually agree to that, because often nowadays all enterprises have to demonstrate impact. So if you argue that by publishing in this journal or whatever, and it becomes a milestone in the consultancy or whatever, even. So I've managed to shift the dial and the dialogue from, no, it's commercial in confidence, to, oh yes, you're right, this is about impact, and yes, we're happy to share it. But it does depend on the sensitivity. So those dialogues might be worthwhile having at the beginning stage of your consultancy or your research contract with the entity.
Absolutely, and I'll build on your point actually later on in terms of accessing commercially sensitive data to evidence your impact, and I use exactly the same approach, Liz. So love that. Krista, yes, when there are just so many confounding factors, other people who did similar research, all this stuff going on, how do I disentangle that? We're coming to that, and we'll come to that after our first break. Emma. Yep, I've covered that already. That's good. Is there an element of today on assembly? Oh yes, assembly of evidence. Yes, absolutely. That's our final segment. So we'll do monitoring, evaluation, and evidence. That's the format. Great. Yes, Jen, it is possible for the same impact to be submitted by more than one institution. If there are more than one UK institutions who want to submit that, The key thing is that each institution has to be able to write its own underpinning research section that explains how that institution's research contributed to the impact. And the most common example of this would be an interdisciplinary project where two institutions have two different work packages. Both work packages are integral to that interdisciplinary whole. Without them, you would not be able to get the outcomes from that project. As a result, both bits of research are necessary and underpin that impact. And technically, you could have a copy and paste job on the details of the impact section, as long as the underpinning research section is different. But most institutions will then add in other bits and kind of thematically link to it, and we'll talk about the impacts in different ways, add other kind of lines of evidence in, and so it does end up different. But yes, you can have the same impact submitted by multiple institutions. And thank you, Paolo, you've already answered my question. I should have looked ahead. Great. Yeah. So Ava, this is quite a challenge. So I do a lot of action research myself, and at what point are you doing engagement and impact, and at what point is this research? And I'll give you an example actually. So here's some action research that I did that basically with action research, I start by asking what is the impact, what is the change we want to see, and so I started to work with a charity. With the charity, work with government. We got a bunch of consultancy projects that then led to a policy mechanism. We then evaluated that policy mechanism, and then we wrote the whole thing up as a research paper. And so effectively what we were doing in this research paper is describing this whole process of co-producing this policy and evaluating that policy based, the policy mechanism itself was based on natural science that, maybe it was one or two of those papers I might have been a co-author on, but ultimately this is the paper. And these were, 1-star, if that, consultancy projects that we tacked together into this paper. And ultimately, this paper was graded internally by the REF reviewers at Newcastle University as a probable 4-star paper. And so that meant that we were able to include this both as underpinning research for the case study and as an output in the output section of REF. And we used it as corroborating evidence because at its heart was an impact evaluation. So that's maybe a nice example of action research. Where we were essentially writing about the impact in the paper, but you'll see how we carved that out and turned that into an academically significant and original contribution that ultimately was a probable 4-star. Great, we're going to run out of time, so I'm going to pause at this point because before our break, I would like to, I know we have many people with expertise. If people have time, I know, Bella, you've done this already. I don't want to put you on the spot, but if others have time to answer some of the more simple questions just quickly while I do this, that might help. We are a community after all. So this is my one rare definition of impact, benefit. And it's critical because, as you'll see from the paper that Bella led, which I'm just going to put into the chat now, we'll look at this in much more detail later on. The number one predictor of low scores in REF, I'm going to argue, is people who misunderstood impact and submitted their engagement, their pathway, the means rather than the end. And about a year out from the REF deadline, I was getting REF impact case studies to review, and about 50% of them had fallen into the same trap. So you think you know what impact is worth really interrogating yourself here, because this is a remarkably easy trap to fall into. When we ask a question, who benefits, of course, we realize that this is more subjective than we might like. And so in the Research Impact Handbook, I've used this word good to emphasize that this is a value judgment. Of course, it's beyond the academy, unless we're looking at pedagogic impacts, but we can talk more about that. I would always still argue to push that beyond and into the workplace, if that is where you're thinking. There's a venue for this. And in this, which is the first peer-reviewed cross-disciplinary definition of impact, I wonder if any of my co-authors on this one are here today. I've paired this word demonstrable with the word perceptible, because demonstrable to whom, against what criteria, against what values, it depends, is the answer, awkwardly, perhaps. And so yeah, the fact that you've got, let's just give you a couple of examples here, the fact that you've got millions of people who have engaged with your public engagement, social media engagement, whatever else it might be. You're famous, you appear on TV on a regular basis. Those millions of reach are meaningless in REF terms if you don't have evidence of a significant benefit. The REF guidance says they are equally weighted. I'm actually telling you there's a difference here. If you have significance, if you have reach, but no significance, then yeah, I don't care how many millions of people you reached. For all I know, you bored them, you offended them, nobody understood a word you said. That reach means nothing. So you need significance for that reach to have any value. Same goes with policy. Great, we've written policy briefs, we've done webinars, seminars, lots of important people have listened to us. We've been called to give evidence to inquiries, to committees. We've been written up in committee reports. Recommendations have been made based on our research. I would argue none of that is impact until you can demonstrate that there is some kind of benefit from that. Because again, maybe nobody understood you. Maybe actually they misunderstood you. There's a new policy based on a misunderstanding of your research. I don't know. But at minimum, on the left-hand side of this slide, I would expect that some of the people who read your policy brief, came to your webinar, listened to your evidence, now understand something important that they didn't understand before. If they can do something they couldn't do before, you build capacity. Perhaps actually this is an attitudinal shift. Perhaps you persuaded people to put some policy options on the table based on a degrowth model that busts a bunch of assumptions about what is or is not acceptable in the current political climate. On the left-hand side, these first two, understanding and awareness, capacity building or preparedness, you tend to languish at the 1-star level in REF terms, with some good context around that to explain why this is so important. You can get 2-star. It's very rare to get more than 2-star for these kinds of impacts, although not impossible. But I would, tell me if you think there's a 4-star one. I've not seen one yet. And the reason is that people want to know, well, yeah, great, but what happened next? How do people use that new skill or that understanding or awareness? And so at the time we've now shifted attitudes at a more fundamental level, at scale. We're changing behaviors, decisions, policies. This is where it's easier 3-star territory. But we're not guaranteed 4-star, even with a policy impact, if we can't prove that that policy is actually a sensible, good policy that ideally is working. And it's once we get to that implementation space, these much more instrumental impacts, that we get into more safe 4-star territory, I would argue. So let's think about the timeline for this briefly. On the left-hand side, these are things which can happen fairly quickly. You can do this based on any research, and I'd encourage you all and your colleagues to start generating impact now based on your understanding of the literature before you've even finished your projects, because great, we're adding value. We're building skills, confidence, etc. So that when we do have our own research, we hit the ground running. But when it comes to these longer term impacts, many of the studies, and there's a growing literature on this, I think 5 studies now, but many of these looking in the kind of 10+ years to 4-star impacts. And that's a problem if you're early career, if you haven't yet started on this, but don't give up. You can definitely get 4-star impact in much less time. Those are average figures. It is possible. But this is why we need to be planning now at this point in the REF cycle. And and really thinking carefully about what we want to achieve and how. So I said that I would give you these time-saving tools. Many of you have had these before, so I'm not going to go into them in any real depth. They're in the chat. If you've been on older trainings, you'll have got Word templates. These are now Google Sheet templates, so you just make your own copy, make a copy in your own Google Sheets, and now you can then edit it for your own. The front of them, just briefly, if you're new to this, is my first step if you want to achieve impact. Before you do anything else, you do this 3I analysis. Who out there might be relevant to talk to? Now, based on what you understand of those people, you can reach out with a tailored email based not on you and your interests, but on them and their interests, which gets you a meeting with them. And now, after talking to them, you can take a step deeper in empathy with them to now understand what the world looks like from their perspective, what their needs are, and how you might be able to actually help someone like that. And that's the impact planning template behind. That is at least informed by those conversations, potentially co-produced with some of those people. We'll come back to this in a bit more depth in a moment, but at this point, I want to just signpost how you can use both of these to fix problems with significance and reach. If I've got something that really works, but it's in a pilot NHS trust, in this community, one system, then for reach, I am going to that 3I analysis. Great, these are the people who are currently interested. Who else? And I ask the currently interested people. I go to my colleagues, we brainstorm this. And now, yeah, actually, well, it's pretty obvious. We just go to the rest of NHS England. Actually, maybe this is just as relevant, in fact, more relevant in Scotland, given the prevalence of this issue. What about hopping over to this sector, this new system? Right, now we have a plan for reach, and the sooner we have that, the better. The opposite problem is where we're working with, I don't know, the largest membership organization of its kind in the world. We've got that potential for reach, but the stuff we're doing is just not really moving the needle. It's not that significant. No one really cares that much. How could we dream bigger? And this is something I would normally workshop using that tool behind our impact planning template. If resources were limitless, if we had limitless time, what would we do then? Let's really think big here. And a bunch of those things will be pie in the sky, but a bunch of them actually, you know what? Yeah, that could actually be a research project. No, we can't do that yet, but that's exactly the kind of project I'd like to get my teeth stuck into that I think we could get funded. And at this point in the REF cycle, then yeah, we build a plan. Sorry, I didn't explain. 3Is are interest, influence, and impact. Thanks, Devon. It's those columns B, C, and D in the front there. Great. Thank you, Bella, for all the great answers as well. What a team. I am just, yeah, leaning on you as ever, Bella. But that's great. So Krista's got a comment here, an industry report, basically a write-up of a large survey-based project which has considerable impact. Spun 2 papers from it, well done. Yeah. Yeah, so you'd have 2 options for how you want to deal with that. You could just have the peer-reviewed outputs in your underpinning research and just explain in your narrative that these, in the underpinning research narrative, that these drew from this report. Or you could actually add the report in as one of the underpinning research references. There would be no risk to doing that, given the rules now around this. In fact, there would have been no risk last time because it was based on everything being 2-star as a body of work. So no problem in putting that into the list. The fact that you've got some peer-reviewed papers out of it makes it very safe. I think in your case, that's probably how I would do it. In some cases, you may have that choice, as I was saying earlier, to choose whether you want to write the consultancy report effectively in as the pathway. But I think in this case, that it was more underpinning research. Good. Okay, so we're going to move on to monitoring. And at this point, I'm going to ask every single person, please, to write an answer in the chat. And I'll write this in. So it is, how do you keep track of your impact? And increasingly now, I'm trying to be a bit better at keeping track of my engagement, because I know that we do have to report on this to an extent. The level of detail that is going to be possible in that engagement and impact statement, I think, is fairly minimal, I suspect. But yeah, it's worth keeping hold of this stuff. And instantly, we can see loads of great ideas. But as I said, I want everyone to write their answer to this. And the most common answer I get at this point in the REF cycle is nothing yet. So an entirely valid answer, and it'd be interesting just to get a sense of how many of us are in that boat. And of course, you can do that anonymously if you like. A few of you saying, actually, we have something at our university. We've got symplectic, pure elements, and the Hive, as it's called previously, Vertigo Ventures Hive Impact Tracker, as examples. And if that is you, then I'd encourage you to use that if you have it. Your institution will be paying lots of money for it, and you may find it good. You may find it useful. I particularly like the Hive Impact Tracker myself, although I don't have access to it. But if this is a barrier, if you don't like it, if it's something that you're just probably not going to do, I'm going to suggest better to do something than nothing. And so have a look at what everyone else is doing in terms of Excel spreadsheets, Word files, folders, and the like. And yeah, if that is something I would actually do, let's make a commitment right now to do something along those lines. And your institution might ask you to put it into Pure, especially if you get identified as a case study author at some point. Great. At that point, you go to that document and you've got everything there. You've not forgotten anything. That becomes a much easier process. Same with ResearchFish or anyone else who's asking you to report on impact. You've got some place where you've dumped everything, where you can find it again later quickly and easily. The key thing is you need some kind of dumping ground that will be quick and easy that you will actually use. So that's why I like to see what everyone is doing. And I'm going to suggest a few upgrades. So for those of you who are using Word and Excel, let's make sure this is properly backed up. Maybe have it as a Word or Excel online file, have it linked on Teams. And now the great thing about this is if you move, your institution still has access to that evidence. Even if you didn't get around to putting it onto Pure like you were meant to do before you left or whatever it was, it doesn't disappear with you. But the other great thing about having this as a shared document is it's not just you now. Your teams can also input to this. So you can now have a standing agenda item of just 5 minutes where everyone piles into that document from all over the world, depending on where your team is, to say, yeah, we've been doing this. Engagement, maybe in one section, impact in another section, so that we are really asking, yeah, so what's happened from that engagement? And now we start to build this picture up, and it's not just us doing that. So I'd encourage you to have it backed up, shareable, and to share it not only institutionally, but with your colleagues. Yeah, various people using SharePoint and Teams. We're meant to be using Teams for this in SRUC. I don't find it very helpful because it's really hard to get people outside your institution putting stuff in. Emma's using a database. Interesting. Emma, could you put a bit more information about that? I'm intrigued by that one. Let's see. Work Tribe is another one. Yeah, Google Drive. Fantastic. So have a scroll through, and if your answer is nothing yet, then see if there's something here. And before we move on, I want everyone to have either opened a Google Doc or Sheets, or done something, put it onto their to-do list before we move on, because we all need something, and most of us can probably do something to upgrade what we're doing as well. Before we do that, I'm going to share the system that I use, and this is not to say you should therefore do what I do, but just as another option. And I use an app. It's called Notion. There are lots of competing apps that do the same thing. So I used to use Evernote, for example. I think OneNote might do this as well. And the key reason why I use this is that it is completely free. It does everything that you'll need without having to pay a penny. So this is my affiliate link, but as I said, you don't have to actually pay anything for this to do what I'm doing with it. And what I like about this is it's an app on my phone, so it's out and about with me, and I can do things offline as required on my phone, but it's also on my desktop, and I can just very easily drag and drop and copy and paste things in, and I actually use it on a day-to-day basis. So just having a look through last week, I just came across this online. There's a report and it's a post up and it's citing our research. I'll put the link. I'll also download it and actually keep it stored in this place. But yeah, I can do that in a few seconds. I might actually do that. I came across something in the newspaper. I was like, oh, could that be anything to do with our research? And so emailed some policy people that I've been speaking to, and yeah, maybe it was. This is just an unsolicited email, but again, I can just copy and paste that in, and I've got that. This is some engagement I did, a presentation to Parliament. Who knows? I do not record all the engagement I have. I have multiple engagements per day with my policy colleagues. But yeah, this could lead to something. That's something I might want to follow up on. So yeah, a debate, a round table, etc. So at this point in the REF cycle, as you can see, most of this is engagement. But we do have, so here's a nice example. So I'm helping to kind of feedback on drafts of some new policy. And so here is the first draft of the document they sent with the track changes. Here's the latest version, so I can actually see which of those track changes made it into the next version and just keep tabs on how much I actually input to this. So I've got that evidence. And I've got one thing so far for REF2029 in here that I might use, I will use in fact, which is a BSI principle, so British Standards Institute, and that's there it is, and our work is cited, but I've helped shape that whole program, and I'm going to be lead author on one of the standards. So that's all stuff that is actually happening. And that is impact, but yeah, slightly thinner on the ground than I would like, but you know what? It's early days at this point, so all good. So I give you a sense of the kind of stuff that you can drop in, the kind of things that you need to be capturing. Somewhere in there's some stuff on social media. Oh, that's interesting. Rather than just favoriting it and then trying to remember which platform, where is it on all these favorites now years later, I'm going to screenshot that. I'll take a link to that X post or whatever it is, and it's there all in one place. And I think that the trap we fall into is that we start with not many impacts, and I can hold it in my head, and yes, I saved it in different places, and I'll find it again later. But as things snowball, yeah, I've got no idea where to even look, and I can't even remember that if there were things on LinkedIn that I need to go and search for now. Yeah, so do something, not nothing, and whatever it is, something quick and easy that you'll actually use. And so I'm just going to pause, first of all, to see if there's any questions. But while I'm pausing, to give you that time to make that action. Open that sheet or document and call it impact, or whatever it might be. Put it on your to-do list, but make a plan. So someone there asking if anyone's using OneNote for this. And yeah, Alex is, and so is Bella, but not as flexible as Evernote. And Notion is almost as flexible as Evernote, not quite as good, I will confess, but it is free. Hence why I'm using it. And there's other issues with Evernote in terms of it not being supported anymore by the developers. So there's lots of glitches nowadays. Good, so thanks, Kristen. Question, should we actively put resources to, oops, that just moved around, to researching and publishing the impact? Give me an example, Kristen. Sorry, I'm not sure what you're talking about there. but certainly, yeah. Yeah. So yes. So a common thing that people have is that we've got workshop survey results. So people came to a workshop and we gave them a questionnaire. We did some training and we've got a feedback questionnaire from the training, or we did some kind of actual survey for evaluation purposes. And we've got those results saved as well. So yeah, any evidence that comes from evaluation. Essentially, what we're doing with this is I'm trying to kind of divide the monitoring from the evaluation, and it's a blurry line. But essentially, what I mean with the monitoring stuff is that opportunistic stuff that kind of comes onto your radar. You meet someone who says something interesting, you see it while you're scrolling. Someone drops into your inbox. That stuff that you otherwise might forget about and miss. That's what I'm talking about in terms of monitoring. The evaluation then is this purposeful going out and looking for specific things that you would expect to see change, and providing that attribution all the way back from the things that you think have changed to your research. And that's where we're going to go next after we take a question from Samia.
Yeah, thank you so much for explaining it. Actually, I have a research which was funded by Midland Engine about women leadership, and I had a report on that one, but I don't know how to monitor that. What is the impact of that one? Midland Engine itself, they have some reports afterwards. They did some another report after that. But do you think that I should do another research to see that how my research or my work actually changed women leadership in that region?
Yes, exactly. And that is exactly what we're coming on to now.
All right.
The fact that you wrote a report, who knows? There are reports with recommendations on a regular basis that are ignored by the people who are meant to implement those recommendations. There are reports with recommendations that get applied, and the recommendations, when applied in the real world, go horribly wrong. So that report is of no value in impact terms yet, until you can demonstrate that there are some benefits on the ground. At that point, now this becomes useful either as underpinning research or as a connection back to your underpinning research. And so the question is, well, how do you collect that kind of data on purpose to work out what's going on? So, yeah. So it's a quick question actually from Murray, separating out engagement and impact stuff. And yeah, I put it, like Bella says, in exactly the same place. And it is because there's a blurry line. And I expect one thing to lead to another. And when I'm reporting on impact, depending on who I'm reporting it to, some people are interested in different things. So for my EU projects, they love all the engagement. And that's partly why I'm now recording more of the engagement stuff, because they want to hear all of that stuff. When I can be bothered, I'll put in some of that stuff to research fish, but I tend to focus more on the impact. But yeah, it's all there, and I can look through and say, ooh, actually, you know what? I should go and follow up. You know, what happened after I submitted that evidence to that inquiry? Was there a report? I've never been sent anything. Let's go and have a look. And oh yeah, and I've been quoted. Okay, let's follow that quote up and see, did anyone actually use that, apply that, do something with that? Let's talk to one of the civil service teams that was the audience for that report. And at that point, maybe I've got some evidence. So I can capture as much as you've got time for. And like I said, I probably actually capture about 10% of my engagement. I just capture the things that I think might one day lead to impact that seem significant, but it's pretty random, if I'm honest, because there's just not enough time. But as long as the impacts are captured. Great. Oh, the quantifying years, someone's gonna have to keep me straight on this. We know the start date because it was in the initial decisions document. I think is it 1st of August 2020. Can someone help me with this? I know there are people who know the answers to this, and the end date is now changed. So the assumption that I'm making is it will be 31st of December 2028, but we haven't been told that formally yet. So someone will no doubt put the exact date, which we assume is going to remain the same, because it's just kind of when the REF 2021 window closed. I think it's 1st of August 2020. Great. So on to evaluating impact, and this is the guts of it. This is where things get both challenging and interesting. So this is the definition in the research policy paper that you've got linked in the chat. And there are some important things to pull out of this. So there are these 3 criteria we see in REF. We need to look at the significance and the reach. In this definition, this is not a REF definition, so it's just the effects of research. But for REF, this has to be our research, hence this attribution point being so important. And there's an ethical dimension to this, which is that REF will only ask us for the positive effects. Research fish also, I think, very controversially, will only ask you to tell them about what went right. I think that our funders should know when things go wrong, but apparently they're not interested. But it is up to us to be interested in what goes wrong and to ask those questions, because only then can we right wrongs and ensure that we learn from our mistakes. Now, the simple way of thinking about this is that we are simply tracing cause and effect relationships, where the cause is our research and the effect is our impact. There could be a pathway in between that cause and effect. There could be multiple effects, where one impact leads to the next impact leads to the next. These could be short and simple causal chains. They could be long and complex, and the longer they grow over time, typically the more confounding factors, and there comes a point at which, you know what, I cannot now really attribute those ultimate impacts back to our research, and we have to stop that claim at the point at which it becomes no longer credible to keep claiming that that really was us. But the process of doing this is, in fact, easier than you think, because you're using your skills as a researcher. Because what we do in our publications is we create evidence-based arguments, and that's exactly what you've got to do in this case. That argument is either to claim that our research was sufficient or necessary, and by that I mean that in a small proportion of cases, we might be able to claim that there was sole direct attribution back to us, that without us, this would not have happened. In most cases, it's a case of that, yeah, there were other people doing this. Yes, there were other factors, but our research made a significant contribution to this. And without this, it might still have happened to an extent, but not so soon, not as much, not as cost effective, not as, yeah, whatever it might be. So we build this argument that as to why our research made a difference, why it made a significant contribution, but we accept that there will be other things going on. It's about finding that golden thread back to our research through all of that stuff, which is what we're going to come to in a moment. And in brackets here, I've said about how to demonstrate rigor. And this could be statistical, it could be based on models and all of that kind of stuff. But that is rarely the case. In most cases, this is the social science idea of triangulation, where we are looking at this from different perspectives, and each of those different sources of data point you to the same reality, and that reality now is credible or believable. So let's come back to the impact planning template, because this is my entry-level approach to this, where we simply identify and track indicators. This is the point in the cycle where you need to think what those indicators are. And as I suggested, if you're co-producing this plan, I get to actually talk to the people I want to help and ask them, what would success look like? Those then become my indicators. And the methods are simply, well, you would count it. Actually, you would need a before and an after. It's a good thing I thought about this now. And yeah, there's any number of methods you could use, but it depends on what your indicators are. And you get to think ahead of time, yeah, is that viable? Do we have the resource for that? Is that actually a research project in its own right? Maybe that's an opportunity for some research funding at this point in the REF cycle. Or actually, no, that's not realistic. What could be a simpler proxy that we could use instead? But something that is measurable, achievable, whether in qualitative or quantitative terms, that would tell us that there is a benefit. Now, the problem with indicators is that they're quite static and linear. And so at the beginning of the project, that's what we want to achieve. But as the project evolves, you know what, the world changes. And perhaps actually we adapt the project and now we're trying to achieve something quite different. Or maybe simply be that people use our research in weird and wonderful ways that we would never have predicted. And now we've got this totally left field impact that was never planned, but is amazing. And we want to capture that as well. And to an extent, that's about just keeping your ear to the ground, being in the right networks, on social media or wherever else, the right meetings, etc., to hear when something is happening a bit left field, to go, oh, that looks like it's linked to our research, interesting. And we capture that opportunistically in my Notion, whatever it is, your Excel spreadsheets, your Google Doc. So we do that monitoring stuff. And that hopefully keeps us on track, even although the original indicators are maybe not quite so relevant now at this point in our project. But what I'd like to do for the rest of the time, we'll make room for lots of questions, so do keep them coming as they come before the next break, is to think about how to design a more complex evaluation that can give you some really rigorous data for perhaps a more challenging claim where there's lots of things going on. Now, this looks a bit complicated, but it's not really, because if you look at the white boxes at the top, we just do some research, we make an impact plan, we follow that plan, and as a result, we think we've got an impact, but we're not sure. So we need to do the impact evaluation, which is our grey box. At the heart of this is our evaluation design, but that design is informed by our aims and our context. And so when we choose that design, as you'll see in a moment, that design dictates our methods. We follow those methods to collect evaluation data. We combine that evaluation data with our monitoring data, and that is what ultimately gives us the evidence of significance, reach, and attribution. And so in the chat, I'm going to give you a link to this. You'll get this in the email afterwards as well, which is the decision support tool that we developed alongside the paper. We decided not to submit it for publication because we were having a nightmare in review already at this point. And we've opted for an easy life, but here we are. And this just helps you to have a think about which of these might be most relevant for you. When you scroll down, it's just a PDF. And you can do this now with that link if you want, but you'll see a whole load of different methods in the second column. And this is just scratching the surface, really, what we could think as a team in each of these categories. But my hope is as you're looking at this, that you're thinking, oh, those are things I've heard of, maybe I've used before, maybe they're in my research group. And these are research methods. And so the first place I go as a researcher is I put my research head on and ask, what's my impact as a research question? And now I do a bit of research design and ask, what methods do I have in my own disciplinary toolkit? And this instantly makes this way more achievable to most of us. And if there is something that I can use from my own toolkit, then this is something I can build into an existing project, a future project, maybe even just unfunded. I can do this on the side. But now this becomes potentially part of a paper. And as I've said here, as Liz was pointing out, if you think it might one day form part of a paper, an epilogue to your next monograph, for example, make sure you do put it through research ethics, because yeah, you're going to almost inevitably have to talk to people to evaluate your impact. So that was a good point to raise earlier. Thanks, Liz. And great, we get this beautiful win-win. I'm now way more motivated to evaluate my impact. I'm getting win-wins, as you saw with that paper earlier on, potentially an entire paper that could be submitted as an output, as well as something that will be corroborating evidence for my impact. Happy days. Of course, a lot of us will discover, no, there isn't anything that I can use from my own disciplinary toolkit, but I can still do that research design element. I'm still in the driver's seat. I can now try and get some consultancy funding, talk to some colleagues. I get that targeted help. And ultimately, that's just that final point, make sure that, yeah, we're doing this as credibly as we can, using triangulation as our approach to rigor. But ultimately, if you're going to make a claim, and if your claim is wrong, people might die, then you're going to have to take as a rigorous approach as possible. This is probably a research project to prove your impact. You're going to need a randomized control trial, for example, in the health domain for this. So for most of us, it's not quite that difficult, but let's just watch out just in case I'm giving you bad advice there and we get some shaky claims that go wrong. As rigorous as possible, but it doesn't have to be to a publishable standard for REF terms as long as it's credible. So I'm going to conclude with 4 mixed methods approaches, things that we can all do, that we don't need to have lots of technical expertise to do. And I'll then conclude with a few thoughts on testimonial interviews. So the first of the 4 is starting with a method called a postcard to your future self. So let's put a link to this in the chat. It's also in the appendix of my handbook, and you'll get this in the email afterwards as well. This is not actually evaluation yet. It's doing something really important that you need to do a good evaluation, which a lot of people are missing, which really stymies them. So what happens is we come into our public lecture. In this case, it was a policy seminar. There's an online version for this as well you can use in webinars and online events. If this is public engagement, this could be at the back of an exhibition on a stall with a little post box next to it. A picture that links to the theme that you're working on, and a question on the back that essentially says something along the lines of, what do you want to do as a result of what you learned today? We're getting people to form an intention. And there's some evidence from the psychological literature, a little bit weak, but there's some evidence that the act of forming and writing an intention increases the likelihood that people actually go and do something. And we're going to further strengthen that, however, by posting these postcards back to everyone who puts their name and address on them, so that they then get a reminder from themselves that they wanted to do this thing. And again, we are increasing the likelihood that they do that thing and that there is impact. For those who tick the box, and this is now GDPR compliant, and I'll ask for their email address as well, we can hold on to their contact details, and now we can do a survey 2, 3 months, maybe 6 months later, a year later, potentially, to find out what actually happened next. And the critical thing here is that we are getting that longitudinal data. From a single event, you might get evidence of awareness and understanding, capacity building, awareness changes, but probably not much more than that. All of the other stuff comes later. And if you have no idea who turned up, and even if you do, if you have no way of getting back to them because of GDPR, then you will never be able to collect that evidence. And as we saw from that previous slide, impact matures over time, and so the most impressive things will be invisible to you. So you need to know who these people are and have a way of getting back to as many of them as possible. So think about how you might incentivize them, something you might want to give them in terms of support, help, extra resources, or whatever it might be, and build that relationship. And when I do this with policy colleagues, if there's someone really interesting who wants to do something fascinating with this, this is a one-to-one relationship I'm now building with them to help walk them through this, support them in any way I can, and really intensively walking alongside them to get that impact. But you get that visibility to what happens next. That's critical. My survey now is going to ask much more, in much more depth. I can give you, if you want, that one, my impact evaluation survey. I do this online, and the nice thing about this now is you fill in a survey at the end of my trainings, and you're invited to provide your email if you're willing to be followed up in 6 months. That email goes straight into my MailChimp, which then after 6 months automatically triggers the survey, and all I have to do is put a link in the chat. All of that impact, GDPR compliant impact collection, evaluation collection happens automatically afterwards. Depending on what's happening with that data, as I analyze that, then yeah, there's some interesting things happening in that respondents, in that organization, a bunch of people from the same organization all doing something kind of similar. I need to go in and talk to some people there. And so we would do what social scientists would call a purposive sample, and we're going to interview a few people. If the idea of interviewing people sounds kind of scary and you're not a social scientist, if you're not, we're going to come back to that when it comes to testimonial interviews at the end of this segment before the break. But essentially, you just need to understand the concepts of significance, reach, and attribution if you're going to get something useful, and just keep asking until you get something that either matches those concepts or you realize actually there's no impact here, there's nothing to see. And those can be written up as testimonials on that headed paper. It could be that you just collect all of that, and assuming you've done the research ethics behind this, and then you then publish that. It could be a low-grade journal article, it could be some other informal document that you publish that in with all the relevant permissions. And now I've just got one source, corroborating source, with multiple people's quotes that I can draw from for my impact case study. So that's my first example. Second is if we are doing more public engagement, online engagement, but there's various ways in which you can use this for other forms of engagement. So stay with me if this is not your bag. And the first thing that I do is that I look on social media to see what's going on. Is there anything interesting that looks like it might be impact there? And I might start with some quantitative analysis, so some word clouds. Yeah, great, looks like there's something interesting going on. It's worth going in more depth. That's when I would do some more qualitative thematic analysis, getting some support if that's not something that I know how to do. I might then reach out to some of those people who are saying interesting things and ask them more via direct message, invite them to answer a survey. I would always put this through research ethics, even if this is not for research purposes, because there are some really quite thorny questions around informed consent and social media analysis. And so just best to be on the right side of that. But now I've potentially got some evidence that I could use that, yeah, there are some interesting things going on here. The next step that I might take is a before-after poll. So I can do this at the beginning and end of an event. So it could be a training, and I can look at people's understanding, attitudes, skills before and after. It could be a series of events that we look before and after, perhaps. This could be online, it could be face-to-face. In this particular example, this is a mass media example. This is someone I interviewed for my podcast from University of Swansea, and she was doing research on maggot therapy in the NHS. Her research showed that due to antimicrobial resistance, a lot of people now will not respond to antibiotics, and with certain kinds of wound, if they don't take maggot therapy, they could die. And yet people refuse it on a regular basis because they're disgusted by it. And so she worked with the production team of the popular TV soap Casualty to get her research integrated into 4 episodes. She then worked with a polling company to get a representative sample of Casualty viewers before the episodes aired, in which she asked essentially 2 questions. What is your yuck factor when you think about maggot therapy? High, that's disgusting. And what is the likelihood that you would accept maggot therapy on the NHS if you were told this would save your life? And to me, at least, surprisingly, a whole load of people said, I'd rather die. And so they aired the 4 episodes, and after they had aired, they reran the survey. And they noticed a reduction in the yuck factor and an increase in the likelihood people said they would accept the therapy. And the final part of the jigsaw for them was to work with the largest supplier of maggots to the NHS to see whether there was an uptick in demand that might give them a clue as to whether this was actually feeding through to clinical practice. Now, that is kind of an expensive way of going to employ one of these companies. You can do this for free, but it will take you time, in which case you're using social media as a funnel on the night that your news interview or whatever it is airs to try and get as many people in as possible. during and after that that airing or whatever it is. And we're working with influencers, institutional accounts, our funders, whoever else it might be, a production team maybe put something out for us. And now we get a sample of those viewers or whoever in. And at this point, we're now asking them those questions. It could be an online survey. It could even be built into that platform. It could be that we're inviting them to a workshop. I don't know, whatever method you want. It's going to be a biased sample, but it's something rather than nothing. And we don't have that problem of reach that is meaningless because there's no significance. My third example is the thorny question of how to collect commercially sensitive data when you're working with industry. And this has blocked many impact case studies over the years, so worth having a quick think about. My first step is not to send an email asking for this because you may well get a no, and it's quite hard to come back from a concrete no via email. Instead, we're going to go into a meeting. So via email, we're asking to meet up with this person online or in person. And we're going to ask the question because you never know, but we're expecting the no and we've come prepared. And so, okay, I thought you might say that, but we can offer redaction from the impact case study. We can give you a non-disclosure agreement if that helps. On that basis, would you be happy sharing this? And in many cases, the answer is yes. For large multinationals in particular, and some others, they are very risk averse, and that's still going to be a no. However, if this is a new product or service that you've helped them to develop, that you may be able to do what, I think it was Liz who was saying this earlier, you may be able to bargain for this on the basis of its value for their business. Because ultimately, if they share that data with you, redacted with a non-disclosure agreement, etc., but if they share that, this is what now makes this viable as an impact case study. And of course, your case study will go way beyond that, and you will also be collecting evidence of how this product or service has changed lives, saved emissions, or whatever it might be. And that data, with your university logo, a government-funded scheme behind it, the REF, that has marketing value. This is now the kind of independent evidence, gold standard evidence that they can now use for making marketing claims. I'm talking to the right person. Now I've got their head of marketing lobbying and saying, you know what, we should really be talking to these guys because I really want that data that they're going to give us in return for us sharing this. And really, how high is the risk? These guys are reputable. That's the hope. But if all else fails, we seek proxy data. I'm assuming you've already looked for whatever is published online, and for many companies, there's a lot of stuff online. But if not, well, great, I've asked profits, but you won't give me that. Would you be willing to give me turnover? If not turnover, would you be willing to give me market share? If not market share, would you be willing to tell me if you are the market leader? Well, yeah, we make a big thing of that because we are, and we're really proud of that. Ha, great. What is the size of that market? And even if they won't tell you, you can work that one out. And now, I am able to make a claim to say that here are these people saying we are the market leader in a market worth tens of millions of pounds per year. Instantly, I've now benchmarked my impact in the millions of pounds, not in the thousands of pounds. And although that is approximate, that benchmarking is still valuable in REF terms. If all else fails, get creative. Maybe it's number of jobs, maybe it's quality of jobs. It's as big as your imagination. Come with your list and just work through, and it's surprising what you can get. Finally, I've left the hardest to last. Let's have a look at policy at this point. And 4 steps. The first is you need that smoking gun. So what is the evidence that you can see that it looks like someone has used your work? The problem is there's no citation. And if you're interested in this, let me see, I'll give you a link to this later, but why don't I just put this in? There are 2 free tools that you can use to find out if your research has actually been cited. One is a free version of Overton provided by Sage, and the other is Altmetric. So I'll just put these in the chat. So that's your good scenario. That's not got the links in it, so let's just give you those links as well. There we are. So all you need to do is navigate to a page with a DOI on it for one of your papers, and you can altmetric it, and you can do that for free. And here is the Sage policy profiles as well. Yeah, when I was saying there's a load of stuff free, Companies House is exactly where to go, and you may be surprised at how much is actually already available. So anyway, back to our scenario. It's not cited, but that looks like our research. Next step is to go to the pathway, and confusing though this is, the reason pathways are so useful in REF terms is that they can help attribute impact back to your research, and that's what we're doing here. So great, we wrote a policy brief where we made this claim. That got, we took that to various webinars, seminars, it got picked up in an inquiry report. None of that's impact, but it's clear we put that idea in and people were listening. And what's the chances now that that wasn't us? Well, it is still circumstantial. So we're going to get a testimonial from someone who is actually able to say, yes, we did use that inquiry report recommendation that came from your work to make that recommendation to, in this case, Treasury. And great, job done. In this particular case, you can see this was a Committee on Climate Change report. I went to the Committee on Climate Change report hoping for a citation, and all I've got is my name on the advisors. So I went to the consultants who helped them write the report, who I had sent a bunch of stuff to, and said, could you share your model with me or anything that you did behind the scenes? They did. It was a spreadsheet model, and that's where I struck gold. In gold highlight, 2 of our papers driving the numbers which went into the report, which are the same numbers in that Treasury announcement. Now, I went to someone in DEFRA to get the testimonial, and had I just emailed her, she would have said, no, never heard of that bit of research, because she simply implemented the Committee on Climate Change recommendation. Of course, I knew that, so I was able to say, great, are you aware of where that recommendation came from? No. Oh, I can see that came from your research. And so now I ask her to provide a short paragraph of text. I'll explain how I do that in a moment. That actually does all of those things. So rather than having all 3 of those as corroborating sources and a much longer narrative joining one thing to the next, I just have one source, one short, pithy paragraph with much more narrative power that does all of that linking for me. And great, a much more effective way of doing this for REF. Ultimately, as I said, to guarantee 4-star for an impact linked to policy, I would always try and get evidence of implementation. In this case, we came prepared. I worked with a charity to create a tracker, effectively a registry that would track the number of hectares and the CO2 equivalents as that policy was implemented. But I said I'd conclude with a bit more on testimonials. This is the most testimonial heavy page from my impact case study. And you can see, yeah, you can potentially use a lot. Nothing wrong with that. As I said before, you may want to get research ethics approval for this. Technically, because it's not research, if you don't plan to publish this anywhere else than REF, you don't have to. I personally feel kind of uncomfortable about this, given that you are effectively publishing this in your REF impact case study. I put mine through ethics approval. And I'd recommend that. But there is some debate about whether I'm going overboard. So I'll let you make your own mind up. I always feel a bit awkward about these kind of conversations. So I start by offering a catch up and some further help. Let's see where you're at. But then we move to the evaluation. This is where we've got our consent form. We're hitting record because I want to transcribe this. I ask about the 3 criteria. I keep asking until something fits with one of those criteria, or it's clear there actually isn't anything to see. And I do ask explicitly that question, did anything go wrong? Because often it's only when you ask that people start to tell you. I transcribe that, and I'm going to highlight the bits that I'm drawing on. I will now write a testimonial myself, drawing as far as possible on their words, but correcting the grammar, making sure I've got all the bits that I need in that. And then they can make any changes they want. I've made their job easier But I've also got a fail-safe in here. If I never hear from them ever again, I've got a bit of paper signed with their signature that says I can at least verbatim quote them. And just to show you what this might look like, this is probably the most heavily manipulated quote in my own impact case study. And I've used that word on purpose to get you to raise that ethical red flag yourself. How much massaging is appropriate, and I'll let you make your own judgment of me on this as I describe the process to you. So you've got that full transparency. And so in this case, this is someone that I chased for 2 years until I eventually tracked her down at one of the climate conferences. By that time, she was a negotiator, and she gave me 10 minutes over breakfast before she went into negotiations to get this quote from her. My first question was significance. How big was this amount of money? And the answer was not as much as I had hoped for. In face of the challenge, 10 million is nothing. And so I talked a bit around that, and she explained how DEFRA's budget was being slashed at the time, added that into the introduction, and it's there. It was an austerity budget. So in context now, this maybe seems bigger than it might otherwise sound. Next, we've got some brackets. She didn't give any years, but I checked this with the documentary evidence and then checked with her. I moved in 2016 to Newcastle, and there are lots of different dates we could have chosen, but I'm choosing one rather than the 2016 dates. Let's go with the 2017 date. So it's nicely kind of safe in the next year after I joined Newcastle. And then we've got where it came from, and her answer was similarly disappointing. No, I didn't base this on research. I based this on evidence from another policy mechanism. And I'm like, what? Evidence from a policy mechanism? That's not evidence. And so she this explained, and she's like, oh, this thing called the Peatland Code. And I'm like, okay. Are you aware that I was the lead author of the Peatland Code and this is based on our research? No, I wasn't. Great. If I send you that evidence, would you be willing to say something along the lines of, yeah, you based it on the Peatland Code, which in turn was based on my research? And she was like, yeah, of course, if that checks out. I sent that all through, checked out, and she was happy saying this. So we are on the hour, and I did say I'd make some room for questions. So I'm going to suggest maybe a 5-minute comfort break, if you don't mind, and we will then go on to REF, because we're already right there, and look at what makes 4-star, and look at a worked example, and make more room for discussion after that. So let's go through a few fairly quickly at this point. Can anyone answer Rihanna's question? Anyone know of any good social media analysis training courses online? I don't. But I would highly recommend, there's a session coming up run by Institute of Methods Innovation about using ChatGPT for engagement, and they are evaluation specialists, and they, I suspect, will be able to answer some of those kind of questions. Let's see. Ooh, thank you. We have an answer already. Great. What if the key beneficiaries are not party to the causal chain that has led to what they're now experiencing? Yet it doesn't matter at all. And so the public being a beneficiary of policy based on your research would be a classic example of that. Yeah, I have nothing to do with the research or any of that process other than maybe voting for a government at some point. So yeah, as long as you can show that causal chain, the people involved don't have to even have heard of you. And in both of those cases, those civil servants weren't aware of my research until I came and talked to them. And oh, so that's where it came from originally. Interesting. That's fine. As long as you can make that link, and there are other people who can show, yeah, so research to Committee on Climate Change report. Great, we've proven that part of the causal chain is mine. Now, she says climate change, Committee on Climate Change report to budget announcement, net link is proven. Budget announcement happens, money happens, restoration happens, CO2 equivalents drawn down from the atmosphere. Each of those links, ultimately, there is a solid chain that goes all the way back to my research. But after the Committee on Climate Change report, none of the people in those subsequent links to the chain might have ever heard of me or my research. But as long as I've got that first link solid, that doesn't matter. So controversial question, Sophie, minimum size for samples. Yes, if you are publishing this, and those will be your own disciplinary norms. In terms of doing this for a REF impact case study, this is not a peer-reviewed paper. It's not subject to the same disciplinary norms. And so you can get away with something which is much smaller, that is a bit biased. However, what I'd be doing in that case would be I would be triangulating it. So if all I've got is a kind of an online survey drawn from social media, as I said, probably a very small proportion of the people and quite heavily biased, then I'm going to be looking for other ways of triangulating that. So some of those people now have done interviews with me, for example. We've gone into a particular organization and made a bit of a case study out of how they used it or whatever it might be. So yeah, where there are weaknesses in your evidence, then doesn't necessarily mean it's inadmissible as long as you're able to triangulate it sufficiently, I would suggest. Yeah, so I guess the key thing I'm trying to say is it does not have to be to peer-reviewed standards, but it still has to be credible. And that's quite a grey area in terms of how much is enough. And so for me, when I'm trying to evaluate how credible is credible, actually, I send it out to reviewers and I ask them, I invite them to pick holes in this. If it's not credible enough, great, I need to triangulate further. I need to add more data. Okay, we do need a bigger sample. And it's that community of people, your REF reviewers, if you have them already, but people who have that kind of sense of what works in a REF impact case study, he will be able to tell you whether or not this is ultimately looking credible enough. Helpful tip. Thank you very much, Sally, on commercial impacts. I am way behind these. There's no way I'm going to get through them all. Wow. Nice, Luca. Great. Yeah, good point, Bella. Too much testimonial ends up lacking narrative coherence. That would be my comment on this. Yeah, exactly what you said as well. There you go, Bella, as always. And I have seen things like that where it's just, really hard to follow, and you need that story. It should be illustrative quotes, effectively. Great, people already using these tools and discovering policy impacts. Love it. Very nice. Yeah, so Ava, you found a citation that is evidence of policy, what might be evidence of policy impact. You need to go and actually look. Is this in a general introduction? So I've got some really highly cited literature reviews. And A, they're literature reviews, they're not original research, and B, they're cited to hell in policy documents, and then when you look at them, they're in this nice kind of introductory blurb that says just some really nice vague things, and they cite my research there, and actually there's nothing in terms of any kind of instrumental shaping of the policy. So look at how and where you are cited to see if this looks like this is actually shaped or informed the policy itself. And if so, now you've got a policy impact. Ideally, I'd want to triangulate that by having a testimonial from someone saying yes, and in that testimonial, you'll be able to disentangle, especially if there are multiple references, how important yours was. And they will also be able to give you a sense of where this is going next. They may themselves be doing a policy evaluation. Great. You may want to suggest one, help them with a policy evaluation to get that data. And ultimately, the next step is to try and get evidence of how that policy is being implemented and what the ultimate benefits of that policy are. Karen, I think you are not alone. Typically, at this point in this training, I get people with a sense of overwhelm in terms of, whoa, I had no idea that this might be that much work. And that's one of the reasons that I always try and encourage you to put your researcher head on, find those win-wins, get some papers, an epilogue, whatever it might be, get some added value out of this, connect with that sense of innate curiosity, creativity, your researcher self. It makes it a bit easier. I'd always encourage you to try and find projects, funding, get those kind of win-wins. And yet at the same time, the methods that I'm proposing here will get you the quality of data you need for a 4-star impact case study. And they are, across all the methods I've looked at, the methods that are the easiest to use and that will take you least time. And so I think it's important to recognize that, yeah, there is a time consideration here, and you have to work out how to make time for that and talk to your line managers and others. And I think as this goes on in the second half of the REF cycle, as you're more in kind of data collection mode rather than impact generation mode, it becomes an easier task to argue for the time necessary to do a decent job of this. But yeah, I think it's a rational response and a valid response. It is actually quite a bit of work, even although I'm trying to make it as easy as possible. There's just no easy way around that, sadly.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm sure it's something that's common to other institutions as well. But at the moment, we're kind of well, there's no other word for it apart from incentivized by publishing research in peer-reviewed papers. At the moment, there isn't a clear kind of workload or incentive for doing impact case studies, but hopefully I think that may be changing within our institution and in you know, reflecting the changes going forward to the next REF as well. So it's at the moment it definitely feels overwhelming, but you know, if there is kind of an incentive for staff, because obviously there's a clear incentive for the institution to have these impact case studies. So yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think there are growing incentives. Most institutions now have impact built into their promotions exercises. It helps you get funding. It's when you're applying for a permanent position, it's useful to have evidence that you can do impact to high standards. But yeah, in terms of workloads and such like that, tends to be second half of the REF for shortlisted case study authors only, and yeah, for the rest of us, it's about trying to squeeze it in the cracks, and that's why I use the time-saving tools that I do. And I would encourage you to go and look at that 3I analysis, my impact planning template, and all of my other free resources. I'll just, if you've not seen them before, just put a link to them just now, because that is the focus across all of them. Like you, I want to have impact. I just don't have time. I don't want to work evenings or weekends. So I need a few time-saving tools. Great. So I'm going to move on. Apologies, I'm not meaning to ignore the chat, but I'm aware that there is limited time. So yeah, this is just to remind me that one of the co-authors on that research policy paper is Rachel Blanche. She is love what she does, and she has a video lecture which I'll give you a link to in the email after today. And loads of other ideas for methods from the arts and humanities that can be used for impact evaluation that can get us the kind of data that you cannot get through any other means. And so, yeah, especially for colleagues in that area, but beyond as well, potentially, reaching out to our colleagues from the arts and humanities, potentially there could be some interesting collaborations, and it will certainly get your creative juices flowing listening to Rachel. So just kind of broadening that one out a little bit briefly. So impact evidence is where we're going with the last part of today's session. And again, I want to give you a definition. Essentially what we're doing here is we're taking our monitoring and evaluation data to create provable claims that will be understood as impact by a specific audience. And the audiences that we are typically looking at here are external partners, our institution, which will have its eye primarily to REF, and potentially to our funders. Now this will not be in the email, but I'll just share with you another paper. So for my own impact case study, I submitted it to REF, but I was working, as I've alluded to, with a charity, conservation charity, who were coming up to their 10-year anniversary, and they said, Mark, could you do one of these impact evaluations for us? And so I was like, yeah, I'm doing this for REF anyway, let's do this with two different audiences in mind. So for REF, the work I did with that charity is just one strand of this. And then for the charity, I turned that into a paper where I looked not only at my work with them, but all the rest of the work that they were doing. The result of doing that was I was able to do a much more rigorous job, which then gave me the data I needed for my REF impact case study. But my partner also had something that was of value for them. And as a charity, of course, I think, as Liz was saying earlier, these organizations need to be able to demonstrate their impact, and what they said they wanted was a peer-reviewed journal article. That's the kind of gold standard evidence they want for their funders to say, look, we're making a difference. And so this is probably a 1 or 2 star paper, but this was not written for the output section. This was written for my external partner. So have a think about the different sources you might draw upon, the different formats you might want to put this into. Your audience matters in terms of how you are adapting your evidence to their needs, and we'll have focus in particular on REF. Now, Bella, fortunately, is with us here today. So, Bella, if I say anything that is wrong, I'm hoping that you will interject. Do just voice on if I'm completely going off on a tangent here, as well as putting stuff into the chat. Always nerve-wracking when you're working with the lead author of a paper that you contributed to. But here it is, and you've got this in the chat as well. And because you've got this in depth to read in your own time, I'm just going to pull out 3 key lessons, and I'm then going to illustrate how I put those 3 key lessons into practice in my own impact case study, with a bit of help from Bella, I will confess as well, actually. So my first of 3 findings from this paper is that we need to make an explicit claim to significance and reach. So it's very clear, here's the significance, here's the reach. And there are certain characteristics of those claims that we're looking for. So we want them to be as specific as possible. We want them to be high magnitude. And ultimately, as we read this, we're going to see that there is evidence to support those specific high magnitude claims to significance and reach. Now, am I sharing? I think I'm not sharing, am I? Something's gone wrong here.
Sharing just stopped. You were sharing until about a minute ago, and you're back to sharing now.
Yay, okay, thank you. Great. So there's 2 elements to this, a qualitative thematic analysis and then a quantitative linguistic analysis. And the qualitative analysis it corroborates what we found in the linguistic analysis. So if you look on the right-hand side here, you can see phrases that were statistically more likely to appear in low-scoring impact case studies in REF 2014. And the word dissemination, if you remember my definition of impact as a benefit, dissemination is clearly not impact. These people have missed the point. They are writing engagement case studies, not impact case studies. A quick word in case you're wondering, hold on a minute here, this is 2014 data. If you look at the criteria, the evaluation criteria in 2014, there was no change between 2014 and 2021, and there is currently no proposed change to those evaluation criteria in 2029. So this analysis still holds. Also, if we look at that quantitative analysis, on the left-hand side, we can see a load of phrases that illustrate some of these characteristics of the claims we are looking for. The paper has lots of these. In this case, I've just pulled out some with policy. That doesn't mean you can only get impact if you do policy. But instantly, when we look at the specificity of this, in England, so I don't know, the House of Commons, compared to a range of, a number of, nationally and internationally, the North, I'm kind of, policy and practice as well. I'm waving my hands around that. There's a lack of specificity in these low scoring ones compared to the very clear claims in the high scoring ones. There's also a magnitude issue here. So there is 4-star reach for England equals the UK equals the USA, national reach. Of course, we can think in much more complex terms than either geography or population size. This could be about reaching a very small but important or vulnerable group, for example. So let's not misunderstand that you have to have national impact to get all the way to 4-star. But there is a magnitude there compared to local or the north. And similarly with, say, House of Commons Select Committee Prime Minister compared to City Council. And so the right-hand ones, the low-scoring ones, have lower magnitude claims. However, it is important to point out that there is a bias in this data where Panel D, Arts and Humanities, did operate quite differently, and those local phrases dropped out of the analysis. So it was just as easy to get to 4-star with a local compared to a national one, in theory, based on that, if you're Arts and Humanities. But across the board, whatever unit you're in, if you've got good context to justify it, then you can get all the way. And I'll try in the background and find an example of one of my favourite ones from University of Staffordshire, which we know got 3 or 4-star, which is very local. Yeah, it was at panel C, I think. So yeah, you can absolutely do this. So yeah, it was a city council, but it was Birmingham City Council, and it's the largest city council in Europe. And yes, we did this in the north of England, which is where this problem is felt more than anywhere else in the country or in Europe. But we solved it there, for example. We cured 9 people, but it was a rare disease. We cured all 9, and it was a horrific disease. So context matters, as I was describing before. So let's not overgeneralize. The second of the 2 points now is that, great, you've got significance and reach, but if you can't demonstrate attribution back to your research, you've got a problem. Now, ultimately, if there is no link, then that is unclassifiable. Unclassifiable case studies were screened out of this analysis. So what we can see, and there are panel reports that suggest this as well, is that effectively where there was a problem with the attribution, there's a missing link in the chain, there's a leap of logic, you're going to get a downgrade for that, rather than unclassifiable if it's just problematic, but kind of okay. And so we want to avoid that. And so in the qualitative analysis, there's some of the stuff I've spoken to already around policy impacts, and Bella and I, and others perhaps on the call, we're currently analysing the policy impacts from 2021 at the moment. Intriguingly, over half of them, half of the 4-star case studies in 2021 are policy impacts. We can say that already, I think. So looking at the quantitative analysis.
Just to contextualize that, it's not over half of the 4-star case studies, but it's over half of the guaranteed 4-star case studies. Over half of those that we could identify as from submissions from 100% 4-star. That's a very different beast of 4-star case studies.
That is absolutely right. Thank you, Bella.
It's second nature to us, but I just wanted to make sure we don't miss that.
Yeah, really helpful. Please keep interjecting. As I said, I can be a little bit approximate in my language sometimes, and this is definitely your strength, not mine, Bella. So, on the quantitative linguistic analysis here on the left-hand side, we've got all of these attributional phrases. And it's tempting to think this is style, but this is not. This is absolutely substance. These are fulfilling a function, and it is this critical function of attributing research to impact. And so immerse yourself in those words and phrases, and you get a sense of how the high-scoring ones are just constantly, yeah, this led to the next thing, led to the next thing. There is that cohesiveness and kind of linked causality built into their language. Intriguingly, on the right-hand side, the low-scoring ones, we did find 3 attributional phrases in the data, but we went back to reanalyze these, and statistically speaking, although in some cases there was some impact on the right-hand side of these phrases, it was much more likely to be researched to a pathway, or maybe to some more research instead. And so great, get that attributional language in, make sure you're doing that, but keep your eye on the ball. Remember, we are trying to attribute to impact. Many other things we could talk about, but you can read about them in the paper, because I want to come to our third and final point, which is that style does matter to an extent. Now, clearly, if you don't have any claims to significance and reach or attribution, then no amount of style is going to save your case study. But I regularly look at case studies that got 3-star and think to myself, you know what, I can see a 4-star impact case study in there if you'd only written it like this. And that's a real shame, because you're not getting credit where credit is due. Now, in Bella's research, loads more coming from her research. There's much more that will talk in both qualitative and quantitative terms to the stuff at the top of the screen here. But in summary, we are just making simpler, plainer, more direct claims that perhaps don't have all of these expressions of uncertainty and hedging statements. The stuff of good academic practice is kind of disappearing because we are trying to simply communicate these causal chains and the things that we are being graded on ultimately. And so this point about how simple is this? Well, actually, although there is a statistically significant difference, the effect size is fairly small. These are all college graduate difficulty. This is not about dumbing it down and writing like you're a journalist, but the higher scoring ones are easier to read. And intriguingly, subheadings seem to matter. And you'll see in my example, subheadings that point you specifically to the impact would be an example of this. And I think what's particularly interesting and important is that panel D, Arts and Humanities, was where the biggest effect size was. And this is a group of people, if you read their research outputs, they don't use a lot of subheadings, and they definitely do not use the density of subheadings they do in impact case studies. This group of all groups realized we need to write completely differently if we are going to actually get credit for this as an impact case study. And so Bella's research very clearly, I think, suggests that there is a genre of writing, 4-star case study writing, and you can crack that genre. And if you can't, then there are people out there in your institution, most probably, who have cracked that. And my final bit of advice from this research is to balance rigor with humility. As a researcher, it is your responsibility when someone like me or Bella come to say, you know what, it would be great if you could say this, to say, yeah, it would be great, but I can't because that is now factually inaccurate. And you draw those red lines and you say, no, so far, but not that far. At the same time, however, there is that humility required to say, yeah, I'm an expert in my field. I know how to write as a researcher, but where I get advice from people who have expertise in how to write impact case studies, I need to do my best to take that on board, because that could be the difference between 3 and 4-star. And for those of you not aware of this, it's probably worth saying the reason we're looking for 3 and 4-star is that our institutions get money for impact case studies. An analysis with Simon Kerridge of the 2014 data on this suggests potentially up to £500,000 over 7 years. I don't know what it looked like for 2021. Maybe you do, put it in the chat if you do. But the point is, it's not an insignificant amount of money. And that's for 4-star, way less than that for 3-star, and nothing for 1 and 2-star. So I said I'd finish with a worked example, give you a bit of the strategic insight into the kind of stuff that people like me and Bella and many others do as we're advising at universities. And I want to show you how to develop narrative structure, causal structure, and claim structure. And I'm doing this at this point with a well-developed case study. And this is to illustrate how the 3 points from our paper can be applied in the context of an impact case study. Bella's workshop coming up is going to be working with a very different, much kind of more draft narrative arcs than this. And that's a different thing altogether. But for this, oops, that was not what I meant to do. For this, I'm going to share my impact case study. So the first thing is to say that I know the score I got for this one, and it was a 4-star one. And if you want to know how to work out the score of an impact case study, you stick the question in the chat, and there are many people who know the answer to that, and the answer, you can't do it for all. In fact, for the majority, you can't, but in some cases you can, and there is a method for doing that. So that's a link to the case study. Here is the actual, this draft, what is it, the Word version of it. And so I guess the first thing is to just illustrate the point that I keep making about keeping your eye on the ball and focusing on impact. And for me, a rule of thumb for an impact summary at the beginning is that more than 50% of this should be about impact. And very often, in the low-scoring ones especially, you see it's the last sentence. Maybe it's the second half of the last sentence is what the impact is. And when I'm reading that as a reviewer, I'm instantly thinking, okay, we've got someone who's missed the point. And so you can't do all impact. So in this case, we have a sentence of context. We've got something about the research. In fact, here we are. We've got a few words about the research. And in fact, no, yeah, this is it. Contributed to design would be my pathway. 4 words. And now we're into impact for the rest of it. So here's that paper that I shared earlier on, and this is used as both underpinning research and as corroborating evidence, as you'll see. And the first point I want to make is around narrative structure. So this is an impact case study that has 2 claims. Impact 1 is UK peatland policy, and impact 2 is international peatland policy. Each of these are aggregate claims. So there is, I don't know, 7, 8 different claims in each case. And those have all been collected together thematically and then created, turned into a coherent narrative that starts with the 3-star impacts and finishes with the 4-star impacts. The goal being that once you get to the end of reading that, your conclusion is that on aggregate, this is a 4-star claim. So aggregate claims are very common, and think about that narrative structure. There's always multiple ways you can cut that pie, but in this case, we went geographical for that. Now, there is a technique for getting to this point, though, which is that I start by listing all the things I think might be impact. And my first question is to check, is this really impact, or actually is it engagement? Is it the means, is it the process? And so, for example, I'm writing about technology, but actually, you know what? I'm not writing about the benefit of that technology. That's the pathway. I need to go and do a bit more work. So my first check is that these are actually all impacts. Great, I've weeded out the engagement now. These are impacts. I now grade each impact individually from 1 to 4-star. And I try to throw out the 1 and 2-star impacts. So all I've got left is 3 and 4-star impacts. The reason I want to do this is that the more 1 and 2-star impacts I leave in, the more likelihood that the reviewers now give me a proportion of my marks for this case study at 1 or 2-star. And that's going to then pull down the QR income that we get as a university, and our league results and all the rest of it. So let's try and avoid that if we can. However, there is a problem. In most cases, the 1 and 2-star impact case studies are your early stage impacts. So the stuff that's happening at this point in the REF cycle, which is also a message to not give up. If you think that's all you've got, that is normal at this point. So we've got these 1 and 2-star things that happen early stage, which ultimately lead to the later stage impacts. And so when I press delete on those early stage impacts, I've actually created a gap in my causal chain, and that is going to get me a downgrade in my mark. So I have to keep them in. But I don't want to keep them in because they're going to pull my mark down because they're not at 3 or 4-star. So what do? I either have an introductory paragraph at the top, or I even label it as pathway to impact or similar. And then I reframe those early stage impacts as pathway. And I can legitimately do that because they were a pathway to those later impacts. But what I'm doing to the reviewers now is I'm saying, you need to understand this, because this is the attributional link from what you're about to read back to my research. I do it as concisely as possible, because it is effectively kind of a yes/no answer. Is there attribution? I don't need to really ham this one up, but it is there. Yeah, I've lost my thread there. There we go.
You're preventing somebody from pulling you down because they don't understand that you don't understand that this is not your best impact.
Exactly. So I'm saying to them, this is not impact. Exactly. This is pathway. So do not grade this as impact. It is pathway. And so this now no longer attracts a score. It doesn't attract a low score. And I avoid that low score going to those parts of my case study. Thank you, Bella, for coming to my rescue. You've been on this one a few times before, haven't you? Brilliant. In fact, it's just because you give the same advice, actually, isn't it?
Yeah, no, I haven't been on this. I haven't seen this. It's really fascinating for me to see how you do this with your case study. But I've said this exact thing to many people, so.
Fantastic. Okay, I don't feel quite so bad now. Brilliant. So that is my first point, narrative structure. We're going to think thematically about how you might create aggregate claims. We could create a coherent narrative, starting at 3, moving to 4, in the hope that on aggregate, this is graded as 4-star. We remove anything below 3-star if we can, and if we can't, we reframe as pathway so it doesn't pull down our score. So that's my summary of the first point. Second point now, if I remember, is yes, causal structure. We'll go to the yellow highlights now. What we've got now is a formula. So we need to go, as we said, cause and effect relationships, research to impact. So in this case, we've got research at the right place, contributes to, and we've got here the development of, so this is the pathway, so a word of pathway in this case, and now implementation of the Peatland Code. This is my first impact claim. I know this is a 3-star claim because we submitted it to REF 2014 and it was graded as 3-star. So that's our start. And we could, if this was below 3-star, this could have just been put as pathway. But because it's at 3-star, let's bring this into the narrative. And we've got a quote that basically says the same thing. That's the paper that I was referring to earlier. And so it's research at the right place leads to this policy impact. And now we're alluding to something that might just be more than 3-star. And so let's just get everyone on mute briefly. There we are. Let's scroll down. And here we are now. Oops, what's happening there? I'm jumping around. Great. So it's the same format now, and we've got our first 4-star claim, and it's research leads to 3-star impact, leads to 4-star claim, and then the evidence to back up that claim. And we're looking for each of these claims to have a significance component and a reach component. And so the reach is 4-star reach, where UK for a devolved issue. So we've got that geographical reach built in. And in terms of significance, we've used the word significant. And this is not just now to an individual policy, those are coming, but this is to the policy landscape overall. And we've got a quote then that's going to give you that specificity and the evidence to support that claim coming up. But it is that same causal structure again, research to 3-star to 4-star in this case. And then finally, one last example is the international stuff. And so this is a quote from someone in the United Nations who makes the same causal link. So we've got research leads to 3-star UK impact, leads to what our internal REF reviewers were split on. Was this a 3 or a 4-star impact? And we can discuss that if you like, but a series of international resolutions. So 3 or 4-star impact. And then ultimately this quote then takes us from those resolutions to new policies in 29 countries, which together represent the majority of peatland emissions. And When you look at the sources to corroborate this, we have this triangulation. So we do, as is common with many policy impacts, have a reliance on testimonials, but we have this documentary evidence, this registry that I told you about there, and we have various policy documents in here as that additional triangulation. This is coming at this from multiple perspectives, and in some cases, those quotes also coming at the same thing from different people. The third and final thing that I wanted to share with you was something around claim structure. And I'm going to give you, again, a very simple formula for this. The first thing that I'm going to suggest, though, when we're making a claim is that we kick off that claim with something that looks like 4-star, as high as possible. And what we're doing here is we're exploiting something known as a cognitive bias that means that that if I'm impressed with a 4-star claim, not quite so impressed with the evidence, I might pull you down to 3-star, compared to if I start with a 1-star claim and I'm really not impressive, oh, the evidence is actually pretty good, I'll maybe pull you up to 2-star. Same evidence with a different framing might get you 2 or 3-star in that scenario. So we start by benchmarking the reviewers as high as possible with as impressive a claim as we can, and then critically we evidence that. And so the formula is simply that we make an explicit claim to significance and to reach. We evidence the significance and the reach, and then we remind the reader of the link back to the research. So in this case, we've got significance, which is 2 major investments and a national strategy. And again, we've got the reach, which is England. When we dig into this, we get more on the reach, and so we're getting a number of hectares, and if you're instantly unimpressed by that, we've got some context to say, actually, it's a historic goal. And that evidence goes all the way through back through that Committee on Climate Change report back to our research. And you'll see this repeated again and again. That very simple. So what is the claim to significance and reach? Evidence for significance, evidence for significance and reach, and then reminding the reader of the attributional link back to the research. So it's as simple as that. Hopefully that demystifies this and also gives you a little bit of insight into some of the strategic thinking that goes on behind this. Feel free to have an allergic reaction to this. Yeah, this is heavily massaged, manipulated, perhaps, if you like. Raise those red flags, draw those ethical lines if you're uncomfortable with this, and do what you think is right. But I think it's useful for us to all be aware of this. And the paper that Bella and I and others published, that we rushed to get out in time for the last REF periods for this very reason. We knew that a lot of the Russell groups were doing their own internal analyses, some of them better than others, and not sharing them with anyone else and giving themselves that leg up in terms of cracking the formula. We wanted to do that as rigorously as possible and then make that open access for everyone. So if there is game playing, then at least it's a level playing field and everyone can play those games if they want. Bella, I hope that's not an entirely inaccurate summary of what we did and why. But I think it's helpful because it can be quite, yeah, okay, great, thanks, Bella. It can be quite an uncomfortable place to be thinking for some of you. So let's go to the questions. Let's see what we've got. Add them in to the chat. Let's just do this via chat. That's probably the fairest rather than letting people jump the queue with a hand up. And let's see, Bella, it is a game and everyone has to play it, sadly. Well, of course, not everyone has to have an impact case study, but all institutions do. And yeah, great. So no worries. Yeah, thanks, glad it was useful, Philly. Okay, no other questions yet. So I'm sure there are. So we've got, yeah, I'm going to finish 1 minute before, so we've got time to head to other meetings if that's happening. Other people thinking, yeah, you know what, I've got enough at this point. So tell you what, if I just give you a link at this point, if you do want to head off early, you know what, I'm full up to overflowing, perhaps. The key thing is that you are aware of all of the free training and resources that I've got, and I'm just putting a link to that, and Bella's will be in this list shortly, and also my monthly newsletter. Everything that I'm doing, but everything else across the sector, any new major REF updates all go out in that newsletter, so at least in relation to impact. Yeah, so no more training, but it's very simple. Someone can maybe put Stephen Kemp's list of 4-star impact case studies from 2021 into the chat. There is a very simple link that tells you all the ones we know are definitely 4-star, and they've been identified by simply analyzing the data, and where you have 100% of a submission at 4-star, you know all of those impact case studies were 4-star. If there are no 4-star case studies in your particular unit, there's a number of those, then you do your own analysis, and you can now work out the units that had the highest proportion at 4-star, and maybe use those as an example. You can do the same in terms of the lowest scoring ones and do a little exercise. Guess which one of these case studies, give them to your research group too, that are similar-ish to the kind of research you do. Which one was 4-star, which one was 1-star? I've yet to find anyone who gets this wrong. It's very obvious, but then the question is why? And people very often replicate the findings from our paper. But it's a fascinating exercise to do. Rhiannon, thanks. Have you found anything to suggest that the REF panel prefers one large example of an aggregated one, so a theme? Yeah. Yeah, Bella might be able to remember this better than me. So I have a figure in my head of 2 point something. So somewhere, so the average number of impact claims in an impact case study was somewhere between 2 and 3 impact claims in the higher scoring ones that we analysed.
Yeah, that's the figure that I've got, 2.8, I think, for the high scoring, and 2 point, or just around about 2 for low scoring. But I wouldn't put too much on that because it really just varies so much, and it really depends on the strength of the claim itself.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we'd have to look at that.
But I would say that by the time you're getting to more than 5 claims, you've got a problem, because you're not able to provide sufficient evidence to do any of those claims justice. And so there does come a point when you do have to make some hard decisions. But if you have one claim and it is multifaceted and impressive, then you can get all the way to 4-star with one claim. Yeah. So survey tools, I use SurveyMonkey, and I'll just log in and give you a link to my impact evaluation survey that I use for my company. That's probably, here we are. If I just collect responses. So if you can not actually do the survey, well, I suppose you could actually, if you want, based on today, couldn't you? But this is an example of, in fact, you might have to do the survey to kind of see all the questions. I'm not sure how that'll work for you, but there we go. And as you'll see, I did not use this as a REF2029 survey, impact case study in the end. Great. Catherine found it a bit concerning that case studies can be scored in such a subjective way. Do you think the reviewers will get better at identifying actual impact with significance and reach as we go through the more REF cycles? I would actually challenge that. So it'd be interesting to hear where you're coming from in terms of what was subjective about this. Bella, I mean, I know you're doing some analysis right now, in fact, kind of this week, on this question of whether 4-star impact case studies effectively just did a hard sell in terms of the use of persuasive language and such like. And I don't know how comfortable you feel talking about this at this point, because it's work in progress, Bella.
Yeah, I mean, I also saw the question and I thought, I'm not sure whether it's about language. So maybe you can clarify, Catherine, because I mean, language-wise, there isn't that much to suggest. I know loads of people say, but language-wise, there isn't, in my research, anything, not that much to suggest that there was a lot of kind of swaying just from, yeah. So Catherine, maybe just clarify.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just the whole concept of impact case studies being narratives, being stories. So you kind of build your case in a way that can be perceived differently by different people, according to kind of their own kind of judgments and perceptions of things. And I guess it's just a little bit touching on your research that found that, you know, the style of writing can have an impact. So I know that reviewers can kind of previous research has showed that peer reviewers for REF are not really well informed about the specific kind of criteria, because especially in 2014, you know, it was the second time that the REF had been, you know, the impact section in the REF had been performed by peer reviewers. So they had little kind of direct evidence of themselves to kind of put forward a scoring system, unlike peer review of academic papers, which is really well defined, and they have that kind of delegated authority to score that. For REF, it was all a bit new, and the fact that, you know, the narratives are perceived differently by different people with different backgrounds. So yeah, it was just touching on that really when you were talking about the style of the impact case study being influential, and that could kind of promote a different scoring based on that.
Yeah. I think what one important thing to say is that you couldn't really style up a case study beyond what was beyond the substance that was there, I think. So you have to have that 3 or 4 star impact in the first place in order to style it. So it's normally, from what we've seen, it's less a case of, oh, they've just hyped that up so much and they just stole themselves a higher rating. It's more like missed opportunities where somebody who, with a bit more kind of structure, would have been able to when I say tell the story, I know it sounds like, you know, I'm opening myself up to attack, not specifically from you, but to help the assessor to see what there was. I think that's the point that we're trying to make. So if you, probably doesn't alleviate your concerns too much, but it's about helping the assessor to see what there is with all the evidence and with making the claims explicit and all that, so that they can give you the credit that you deserve, or can give your case study the credit that it deserves. And now, as I say, in 2014, there wasn't really a precedent for that. So some universities recognized and had the means to follow on that recognition, recognized that whoever gets this right now is going to be great, and that. And others didn't. And in 2014, you can see this massive discrepancy between universities of what case studies look like. In 2021, I think that was different because everyone had access to the database and could actually see examples of high scoring ones. And that made things easier. That leveled the playing field a bit more. And then I'm still not answering your question because it's difficult.
Well, kind of. I mean, I guess my point was, just as we're getting better as researchers to write those impact case studies, are reviewers getting better at realizing and looking out for the different types of evidence?
I think so, yes, because I mean those
as we go through REF cycles. So yeah.
Yes and no, because the reviewers are different each time, not completely different, but there are new people being recruited and others coming out and all that. So it's not all the same. But just while the things are going on in the chat about the case study data ratings, does someone want to put the link in the chat for the spreadsheet where we get our info from? Or maybe I can do it later. And yeah, so those assessors that I spoke to, and what all the literature also says is that sometimes it was looking at proxy measures and like accidentally falling into more known means of assessment. Like you say, you know, with journal articles and peer review for that, we know how to do that. Impact case studies, not so much as new. So that's your concern. That I think that was a bit of would have been a big and valid concern in 2014. But those that I spoke to have talked about extensive calibrations and extensive calibration and recalibration and discussion. They were both in main panel, or they were all in main panel. No, actually, no, they were both main panel C and main panel D, those people I spoke to, so I can't speak more widely. But yeah, I think those people...
Sorry.
Right, yeah, okay. Maybe final thing is that because all the sector generally is talking more about impact and getting better at spotting what it is, I think that will filter through to assessors as well.
Yeah,
sorry. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
I was going to say something similar. We need to finish up, sadly, but to use the phrase that Julie Bailey and David Phipps coined of impact literacy, and shout out to her recent book, which I love. Yeah, I think we're all becoming more impact literate, and so we can expect to be more rigorously scrutinized in future. But that subjectivity remains inherent. What is an impact for one group in one place in one time may be the opposite of that, even to the same group in a changed time or context. And so this is not value-free. We need to engage with that as we think about our audience and how this is going to land. Just remains for me to say thank you, everyone. I hope this has been useful. My sense is that there's been a lot of very specific questions, a lot of people really getting to grips with this. I hope it's not terrified you. I hope you feel equipped, but also perhaps even a little inspired about what you can go and do now to generate impact that can be monitored, evaluated, and ultimately turn into the kind of evidence that will hopefully make for a good scoring case study in REF 2029. You've got an email with my slides, with the recording, and all of the links that have been in the chat, and much more, including a link to Bella's event later in the year. So stay in touch. Thank you.